Okay, welcome to uh, Christian Virtual Fellowship. This is the online church for Allegiance to the King. If you haven't not familiar with who we are, check out our website at the number 2k church.org, a2k church.org. Check us out there. If you're watching this later on YouTube and you'd like to attend an online fellowship with us, and you can go to the website and contact us through the website. This is a church for isolated biblical Unitarians all around the world. We have several people on tonight that are in different parts of the world. And so check us out. And if you want to join us, come and join us. So tonight, I want to look at if you are a person who struggles with anxiety, anger, depression, um, maybe mental illness, trauma, those kinds of things. Or if you are a person who is very close to a person who suffers from those things, then this teaching that we're going to go through, this workshop that we're going to go through tonight, is designed to help you. So, uh, calling it a Cultivating a Quiet Heart, Healing Practices for the Wounded Soul. So what do I hope to get out of this workshop? I hope for yourself or someone you love who may be dealing with all those things, emotional, mental, nervous system issues, and especially if you've been dealing with it for many years, maybe even a lifetime, to see that change is possible and that peace is possible. Who is this workshop for? So this is people with trauma backgrounds, whether that's just PTSD or whether it's complex trauma, ADHD, nervous system dysfunctions, anger issues, anxiety, depression, all that kind of stuff. And almost even more than that, it's for the people who care deeply about them, but struggle in their relationship with them. One of the things that I want to say before we dive into this is that if you have trauma triggers, you may feel yourself getting triggered in this workshop. If that's the case, I want you to know that I understand completely and it's going to be okay. Take a deep breath, and I think you'll find some really, really helpful stuff. Okay, so first I want to look at things that can cause lasting nervous system and mental health issues. And this is just a partial list. Certainly trauma, complex trauma, which we're going to get into here in a minute, chronic stress, bad sleep, bad diet, lack of exercise, loneliness and isolation, chronic infections, and this is a particular, I'm not going to get into this very much tonight, but there's a lot of chronic infections, especially like tick-borne illnesses and things like that, that can go for years with no diagnosis, and the person is just struggling, and they don't know why, and it's actually a chronic infection. And of course, drugs and alcohol, things like that, other kinds of addiction. All these things can do damage to our mental health, to our nervous system, and create problems over time that last a really long time and can cause habits to develop, mindsets to develop that can be detrimental to ourselves and to our loved ones and our relationships. So what I want to do is this is obviously this is just a workshop. There's a lot to this whole subject. There's so many choices I could make to sort of deep dive into. I've only got a little bit of time, so I want to focus on a couple of things. I'm going to look at long-term change and a strategy for that is a biblical strategy that science is really just in the last few years starting to understand. And we're going to look at that in terms of how to make long-term changes, and we're going to focus on complex trauma for that. But it does apply to any number of different kinds of mental health issues, neurological issues, or nervous system issues, things like that. And then after we go through that, we're going to do a quick review of some, I call them short-term strategies for helping along the way and things that can help you in when you're in the throes of maybe dealing with some, nervous system dysfunction, maybe anxiety, maybe trauma triggers, that sort of thing. Okay, so I want to focus first on complex trauma, and we're going to use that as our example of how to take this strategy that we're going to talk about and apply it to complex trauma to help heal from complex trauma. And part of the reason I want to do this with complex trauma as the example is it's very, very challenging for those who have it. It's often, lifelong. It often occurs in childhood, and then the person struggles with it for the rest of their life. I've known people who are in their 80s who are still have a broken record playing that was formed in their childhood from complex trauma. Okay, so complex trauma and its lasting effects. First of all, what is it? Um, Complex trauma is the experience of trauma consistently over some period of time, and typically a long period of time. And so this could be, for example, a soldier in war or a child who's abused by their parents. You can have trauma or even PTSD from a car accident. Like if you get into a bad car accident, often people have trauma from that, emotional trauma, that sort of thing, and are affected by it. Uh, but when you have that same sort of thing over and over and over again, often uh, from people that you are close to, trusting, like a parent, that it has much greater damaging effects. And so what happens is trauma reactions, your reaction to the trauma develops defense mechanisms. And the reason it develops these defense mechanisms is they have some sort of effectiveness. Even if looking at it, you might be thinking, well, how in the world was that effective? It in some way, shape, or form, that person's brain is feeling good by the defense mechanism, even if they are feeling really, really terrible in the trauma. And what this does is it triggers the reward system of the brain and creates behavioral patterns that last. They can become very strong behavioral patterns. In many cases, other reward center behaviors later on are then added to that as a way of coping for example, addiction, alcohol or drugs or sex or those kinds of things can then be added into these defense mechanisms that were, um, you know, originally created or the brain developed because something happened that triggered, oh, this was effective in some way, even if it was just in the person's own mind. And then later on, they may even be out of that trauma and they are really a looking for ways to feel better, and they'll add other strategies that's not necessarily consciously, but and more bad habits can develop. So trauma responses, they develop during the trauma, and there's a few categories of basic nervous system responses that occur, and probably most of you are familiar with at least a few of these, and they are fight, flee, freeze, fawn, and flop. So let me give you a quick definition. Fight's pretty easy to understand. The person is defiant and they're going to argue and fight and get angry and that sort of thing. And when it was happening in the trauma, it was a way of protecting themselves. But then what happens later is they're still having those deep patterns occurring as responses to triggers that later on uh, don't really apply in that situation. It's somebody says something and it triggers that fight response, but what they said really wasn't, should not have elicited that response. Maybe they just disagreed about something, or maybe they said a particular word, or maybe they said it with a particularly sharp tone or something like that. And certainly it might have warranted a, hey, that's not really nice or something like that. But instead, it it elicits this fight. Flee, pretty simple. Person, closes down. I've seen this, many, many times where something's occurring and the person, without really saying anything, gets up and walks out. And they may go off and have a serious problem. They may go out of the room crying. They may, get in their car and drive away and hear what's happening. And it's because that is their trauma response. And you can have more than one of these going on with someone with complex trauma. Freeze, this is less common, and it's where the person just kind of locks up. And then fawn is where, again, this is also not as common. This is where the person becomes, in response, overly nice and trying to placate the other person, that sort of thing, to try and make them not behave in whatever way was traumatic towards them. And then finally, flop, and this is at least certainly in my experience. I don't think I've ever experienced somebody have that particular reaction. I've seen all of the other four, but flop is where the the central nervous system actually kind of shuts down. The vagus nerve shuts down, and they have a reset, and they kind of sort of faint, and they it's like they're temporarily paralyzed. And so these are reactions that were developed as defense mechanisms for the input of the trauma that then become habit patterns that can be lifelong and can be very, very difficult to get out of. So they helped, but the problem is at the time, in some way, and it may be that it helped, like alcohol helped, right? It may be a temporary in the moment help, but the actual long-term effects, even in that situation, may have been more detrimental to them than that temporary help that it was creating. And of course, in the long term, in the now after the trauma, those behaviors are they're not helpful at all. And they one of the big problems for people with complex trauma is it's difficult for them to have good relationships. It doesn't mean that they can't, but it's much harder because of those things. All right. The good news about this is that even people with complex trauma are not stuck with the way that their brain operates currently because of that trauma. The reward center of the brain is a part of the brain that helps to create habits and ways of thinking. And because of what's called neural plasticity, the brain can actually change. And the reward center of the brain is a big part of both how the habits were formed in the first place and then how you can get out of them. And this is, both could be action type habits, it could be ways of thinking type habits, all that kind of stuff. And so when something happens to us that we experience as good, the reward center releases dopamine and serotonin, neurochemicals that help establish new pathways in the brain, and which translates to new habits and new ways of thinking and reacting. And this can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. The brain is not interpreting in that sense. For example, if we figured out how to solve a tricky problem, our brain is likely to release these chemicals to help stronger connections be formed so that we are better at solving the problem the next time. If you think about if you're learning a language and something clicks, right? You heard something and oh, I understood that. The reward center of your brain is going to reinforce that behavior. But it can also work in a negative way, and in a very negative way, such as if we are depressed and we drink some alcohol and the alcohol made us feel better. And as a result, our brain may trigger the reward center, deciding that drinking alcohol is a good way to feel better. And if that cycle continues, it can lead to alcoholism, right? So this part of the brain, this plasticity part of the brain, it's it's can work for us or it can work against us. Well, obviously with people with complex trauma, it has it has worked against them. Even though it may have had some form of help in the moment, it didn't really help them in the long run, and so they're dealing with this for years and years and years and years. I want to look at two mechanisms that a person can use that helps to trigger the the reward center of the brain in positive ways that can then help to rewire the brain. The first is gratitude, and this is a powerful tool for changing your brain, and you have quite a bit of control over this particular um, you know tool for modifying your brain. And there's a couple of different ways that it works, but essentially gratitude triggers that reward center of the brain and releases, again, serotonin, dopamine, and all these connections are being made associated with the gratitude and what's being expressed in the gratitude, the circumstances of the gratitude, all that sort of stuff. And it's helping to make new pathways in the brain. And the more that happens, the stronger they become, and the other old habits begin to atrophy in the brain. All right, so we're going to look at two aspects or two ways of gratitude. One is expressions of gratitude, where you are expressing gratitude, and then the other is receiving expressions of gratitude. In both of these cases, you will experience the you know this the reward center of the brain rewarding these gratitude experiences. Here's the key: they have to be sincere. If you say some gratitude statement, I call it gratitude platitudes, that either isn't true or that you don't really believe, then it's not going to work. In fact, there's a whole movement of practicing gratitude, having gratitude journals and things like that. And one of the ways that it gets taught to do gratitude is just take the things that are going on in your life and say affirmations and gratitude and regarding those things. The problem is if it's not honest, if it's not how you honestly feel about it, if it's not if you're saying some gratitude thing to another person and it's not really sincere, it's not real, it's not really true, then it's actually potentially um negative, like where it actually backfires. It actually creates more problems. And so we want to avoid that. Gratitude has to be genuine. And we want to be honest. So if I'm going to, think about things that I'm grateful for, maybe express things that I'm grateful for, that sort of thing, I need to be honest about my situation. And so one of the things I can do is I can be honest about the situation that is making me anxious, but then turn and express genuine gratitude. And if you think about the Psalms, David does this over and over again, where he starts the psalm where he's beside himself, and he's crying out to God, for help and that sort of thing. But then he switches mid-psalm and starts expressing gratitude. So sincere gratefulness triggers that reward center, and then that helps to tie it to whatever that gratitude is, and build strong connections and new pathways. The other is to receive gratefulness, and certainly when we have someone say something to us that they are sincerely grateful to us for whatever that thing is, it makes us feel good. Now, I know when I was first learning this, I know what I was thinking, and people that I've talked to about this, it's often they'll bring this up, where, well, I don't know, I don't really like it when people start saying that kind of stuff to me. It kind of makes me feel uncomfortable. And for someone who has complex trauma, that's especially true. But there is a difference, right? So I like to use the example of when I teach. So if I teach a Bible lesson, for example, and somebody comes up to me afterwards and they say, "That was a great teaching," I'm sitting there thinking, do they really believe that? Do they really think that? Do they even know what I taught? Are they just saying that because it's sort of a nice thing to do? It's maybe they think it's even kind of expected or it's habitual or something like that. And I've had enough experiences where I would ask them questions and it was just a platitude. And I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in that, right? And I'm not looking for praise when I teach the Bible, but when somebody gives me sincere gratefulness when I teach, it's a very different experience. So, in other words, the first example, they come up and they say, oh, it's such a great teaching. And I might say to them, well, what was great about it? What really stood out to you about it? And often they'll look at me and, well, well, and then they'll find something to say, right? And I'm like, okay, you're just saying stuff. And, but then sometimes I'll have people say to me, I loved your teaching. I am so thankful that you taught that today. I've been struggling to really with this certain topic, whatever that topic is. And I really just haven't found the right answer. And then today, when you talked about such and such, it just kind of all clicked for me. And you read that verse in Peter, and it was like I was reading it for the first time, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's the answer. And I'm just so blessed. I feel like I know what I need to do now. And that's a very different experience for me being the person receiving this because it's sincere. It's real. I really did do something that was good for them. And they are expressing genuine sincere gratitude towards me. And and so I'm feeling good about that. Now, obviously, when I say gratitude, um, to express gratitude to other people, I'm really in control of that. I need it to be. I should, if it's not sincere, I shouldn't do it. But it's not that hard to find sincere expressions of gratitude. I can always do it to God, right? That sort of thing. And and even in me, when I do that, it's going to trigger that reward center. But how do I, the expressions of gratitude towards me may be few and far between, but we need to find ways to induce that because it's a very powerful way to changing our brain. If we're wanting to change our brain out of these old bad patterns that harm us, we need to find these ways of creating that where it's going to give us more and more opportunities. And I'm going to talk about a couple of different ways that can happen. And then, well, I guess these are the two ways. So one is we can do things for people that induce gratefulness, and the other is that we can turn those stories of gratitude events that occurred where we received gratitude, we can turn those into a story that we write out, we learn, and make a practice of remembering those stories. It doesn't take very much. All the science shows that if you have just few minutes a week, really, just several times a week. You can spend a few minutes thinking about those stories that you wrote down, and the more you have, the better it is. And it's not as powerful in inducing the reward center as the original event itself, but it does actually do it. And so I can reinforce. So if I can create an environment that induces gratefulness and I'm writing these stories, both of those, and then I'm making a practice of retelling that story to myself as part of a practice of rewiring my brain. Both of these things, expressing gratitude, receiving gratitude, can come together and create a lot of powerful brain change. The other way I want to talk about in terms of a powerful tool for rewiring your brain is giving. And giving is the other powerful tool that, along with gratitude, that we're going to see from the Bible is able to help us to really make massive changes. Okay, so using our giving to our change of brain. Here's something interesting. Both voluntary and involuntary giving have been shown to trigger the reward center of the brain, and um, which seems weird to me, right? Obviously, involuntary is better than involuntary, but at causing dopamine and serotonin release and all that kind of stuff and wiring things. But involuntary does it as well. And an involuntary way of that occurring is taxes. If you're paying taxes and you learn that your taxes are being used for something good, it will actually trigger this reward center in your brain. So, um, anytime you are giving for the purpose of helping other people, it, it's going to cause this trigger to occur, this virtuous trigger to occur. And then what we can do is we can create many small acts of kindness, and we can create large sacrifices, right? And both of those will provide a lot of these giving experiences that are rewiring our brains. So, and doing both is obviously good. Obviously, a large sacrifice when you really went out of your way to help someone and they are very grateful to you, then it's going to create an environment in which gratefulness is likely to be expressed, right? Because of the nature of the large sacrifice. But many small acts of kindness can also create this environment where gratefulness expressed towards you is likely to occur. And that's in the many small acts of kindness. The more you do it, the more likely you are to receive gratefulness. So not only does the giving have a benefit in helping your brain to change, but as you do more of this, it creates the environment where gratefulness expressed to you is more likely to occur. So again, you're creating this virtuous cycle where more and more and more you are able to have experiences of both of these kinds of tools for brain change, and you are more likely to experience those new pathways and the atrophy of the old pathways. And then you can also think about what you have given. Just like you can think about the stories of gratitude where you received gratitude, you can also think about the times, maybe even write them down. And this is just between you and yourself. And so we're not talking about going around bragging about things that you've given. Obviously, that would be detrimental. But you sitting down and thinking about how you helped someone and thinking about how good that was and that you want to do more of that kind of thing, all of that, you're rewiring your brain in that direction. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to take all this, and there's a whole lot of research that's been conducted over the past um, I don't know, at least a couple of decades now on all of this stuff to show that the how these things are working. And in fact, Andrew Huberman, Dr. Andrew Huberman, who is a neuroscientist at Stanford University, he's also a very popular podcaster and YouTuber and things like that, where he is a biohacker. And he's got a book coming out in September where called Protocols, I believe. I'm pretty sure that's the name, Protocols, where I haven't read the book yet. Obviously, it's not out yet, but presumably he's going to be taking you through in his book all these different protocols to help you change your brain. Anyway, so this has been going on for a while now, but that's all sort of this scientific research and what people have been, seeing effective and that sort of thing. What I want to do then is I want to look at, okay, how does the Bible relate to this? What does God say that about these kinds of things? What, how does this relate to the Bible? And I want to show you that it relates to this in this super powerful way. John 13:34. Jesus gives a new commandment. He says, I am giving you a new commandment that you love one another just as I have loved you, that you also love one another. It's interesting, and many of you guys, if you've watched my other videos and things like that, a lot of I've taught this verse, and others like it a lot. And the deal here is Jesus is not repeating an old commandment; he's giving a new commandment. He's not repeating "love your neighbor as yourself." That was an old commandment. That's from Deuteronomy. He's giving a new commandment that is bigger. This is not, it's not love your neighbor as yourself. This is love your neighbor self-sacrificially, right? And specifically love one another. He's referring to the disciples. The family of God is commanded to love each other self-sacrificially. And in fact, if you put this commandment in your head and read the rest of the New Testament, what's going to happen is you're going to see that largely the rest of the New Testament is teaching and fulfilling this commandment. And so, okay, uh, uh, this commandment you can already see that we are supposed to do, that we're commanded to do. That Jesus says 2 chapters later that if you're not doing this, you're not in Him, you're not loving Him, and you're not going to bear fruit and all this kind of stuff. And so this commandment is an enormous key that unlocks all of this brain change. I want to caveat something first, real quick, because as I've shared this with this whole concept often of self-sacrificial love, that people who have complex trauma, I find that it frequently triggers them, and they want to argue against it, go to extremes, shut down, flee, they just can't handle it. And the reason is that all these, these trauma response triggers, they're protection mechanisms against a person who's taking advantage of them and damaging them. Now, it may be only perceived that way, right? It was real at one point, but now it's real. And so what can happen is they can become nervous. They can, push back. They can't imagine how they could do that kind of thing, all the way to what's called an amygdala hijack, where they just they're gone and the amygdala has taken over, and it's like an animal response, right? That's when you get into fight, flee, and all that kind of stuff. And so what I want to say, if that's you, if you have a lot of that kind of trauma or nervous system disruption, that just hearing the idea that Jesus has commanded us to love self-sacrificially, as Edgardo was talking about earlier before we started the recording, that you have to be willing to give up even your own life. That like Jesus' commandments around this stuff are really quite um, jaw dropping. So what I want to say to you is start with those who are close to you and who you trust first. Don't worry about this in terms of all the stuff that we're talking about with just any, you know, any old person. Just do it and think about it and start to try and apply it with people that you're already close to, you already trust, and it's a way of easing into it. First of all, we have the commandment anyway towards those people. But if you're not ready to do self-sacrificial love with your enemy, for instance, that's okay, right? You're. I heard this recently from a person with complex trauma that they felt like life was unfair because they started in the negative, right? They coming out of childhood instead of normal adjusted adult, they're way behind negative in terms of normal adjusted, and they feel like they're never going to be able to catch up. And and so don't need to worry about that. Just, practice this self-sacrificial love in a way that is you can do safely with people that you trust. So if you think about self-sacrificial love, then it creates an environment in which both giving and gratitude are ripe, right? Obviously, it's giving because if you're self-sacrificially loving, you're giving. But also, it is likely to induce gratitude, right? If I am being selfless and helping people and I see someone in need and I help them and I just do that kind of thing, well, what's naturally going to happen? Obviously, not necessarily all the time, but obviously it's it's going to induce gratitude. Now, I don't want to do it because of that in a kind of a normal thinking way, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about I need to rewire my brain. Okay. I need to induce gratitude situations. So I can do this selfless, self-sacrificial love and create the environment. Now, I don't want to be disappointed when someone doesn't express gratitude. I did something really nice for them and they don't. If I'm looking for them to give me gratitude, that's bad. And Jesus actually says, don't do that, right? I don't want to look for that. I want to look for the opportunity to help and to serve. But what I know in the back of my mind is some of these are going to end up in a gratitude event that's going to help me to rewire my brain. Another thing is to accept gratitude with grace, right? So one of the problems that people with complex trauma and other people as well can have is they, they just, they don't want that. I don't want that. No, it's okay to accept gratitude. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to necessarily have that as my motivation. I'm looking to get something from this person and it's gratitude. I don't want to have that attitude about it. But when they voluntarily are, expressing gratitude towards me, I don't want to deny it, minimize it, those kinds of things, downplay it. Just accept it with grace, right? So I don't want to set up negative associations where I'm like, oh no, yeah, no, 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 it was nothing. Don't worry, I absolutely, yeah, yeah, no, no, you don't. We don't want to do that. Accept it with grace. Oh, thank you. You know what? I saw that you needed help, and you know what? This is what we're supposed to do for each other, right? And accept the gratitude with grace. The second thing I wanted to say about this whole self-sacrificial love is don't do it with a bad attitude, right? I've seen people they know that they're supposed to be obedient to the idea of this commandment of self-sacrificial love, but they're kind of doing it grumbling, right? Well, God loves a cheerful giver, right? So don't do that, right? Work on your attitude. Make sure that if you're going to do it without the attitude. And because again, especially if you're trying to rewire your brain, those bad attitudes coming in there are working against your practice to help you to rewire your brain. Okay, so that's our example of complex trauma and the a powerful thing that you can do to rewire your brain if you have that. There's lots of just even bad habits can be rewired with these kind of things. Just you don't even have to have trauma or those sorts of things. But and there's other ways to beneficially trigger the reward system in productive and positive ways. But for me, I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, wow, this is our great commandment as Christians. You know, I can see what God is doing in this situation. He's creating this virtuous cycle and he wants us all doing it. And wow, think about if we're all self sacrificially loving each other, giving of ourselves, being grateful to each other, what's happening? We're all rewiring our brains to this God given system that creates peace and joy, gratefulness, all that kind of good stuff. All right, so I want to switch and go into, and we're just going to go through this next part pretty quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'm just covering these tools in a very cursory fashion. I'll say maybe a little bit on a few of them, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. If you have questions about some of these things, I'd be happy to answer those, after the teaching, that sort of thing. All right, so I want to give you a healing toolbox that has a number of things in it that can help with any of these sorts of problems, whether you have mental illness, whether you have a complex trauma, whether you have some sort of nervous system dysregulation, all that kind of stuff, or you love someone who has that, and then you're constantly running into that kind of stuff. The first is prayer. Prayer, prayer, prayer. Prayer is so powerful, right? When we go to James says, you have not because you don't ask, right? This is the first thing he says before he goes on to say you don't have because you're asking for things in your lust. But the first thing he says is you don't ask, right? We need to ask. We need to go to God and we need to ask for help. And in fact, in this very subject, a little over a year ago, I was feeling frustrated with just kind of a helplessness about helping people with complex trauma, just year after year going through the same stuff. And I'm just like, God, I just don't buy it that there's no way for out of that stuff for them. And and so I started praying and I said, God, bring me resources. Help me to understand. And a few months later, they just started flooding in. And for months now, I just keep getting more and more resources helping me understand how to better and better and better help people in that situation. So prayer, always start with prayer. Always, be asking God for what you need and expecting that He loves you and He's going to help you. The next is sleep and circadian rhythm. It's super, super important. It's way more important than typically we realize. And I'm not just talking about sleep in the sense of getting a good night's sleep. I'm talking about the whole circadian rhythm. It's as important to getting a good night's sleep as getting up in the morning when the sun is coming up and getting sunlight. There's all these chemical processes that are going on in your hormonal system because of that cycle that will make you healthier and make you live longer and help to get rid of all kinds of nervous system problems and mental health and emotional problems. We all know a good night's sleep is a good thing and it helps us, but really we need to have overall good sleep. And there's so much more to say about that I don't want to go into tonight, but got to have good sleep. Next is breath. And this is really sort of in Western cultures is largely ignored and is treated as if any kind of breathing is good kind of breathing. And that is not true. Studies have demonstrably shown that mouth breathing is unhealthy for you and is actually destructive to your health, and that nasal breathing is healthy for you and renewing and all this kind of stuff. I'll give you just real quick. The primary reason for that is that your nasal passages have the ability, as you move oxygen across them, to create nitric oxide, which is something your body needs for all kinds of purposes. But one of its main purposes is it relaxes blood vessels and the whole vascular system, lowers blood pressure. When you take big deep breaths through your nose, you start to feel like less stress and that sort of thing. But what you may not know is all that nitric oxide is going down into your lungs and is making your breathing better. It's more efficient. It's moving oxygen and carbon dioxide more efficiently because of the nitric oxide. So learning to breathe properly is a big deal. I recommend a book called Breath. I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but excellent book. It's yellow, and I wish I could remember. I should put it in the notes. Um, it's an excellent book. It's kind of a little strange in parts of it, but really really good stuff. Diet. This is kind of commonly known at this point. Obviously, diet. You can have a lot of health problems if you eat a bad diet, right? That's just given. But it's so much more than that. A leading psychiatrist at Harvard published a book called Brain Energy, where he goes through and shows how all of the data shows that metabolism dysfunction in mitochondria and brain cells is the pathway for all mental illness symptoms. So whether you're talking about Alzheimer's or schizophrenia or anxiety, depression, a whole bunch of things that involve the brain, that metabolism problems are at the root of that. Now, what's causing the metabolism problem might be different, but it's all stemming from mitochondrial dysfunction in brain cells. And even they've started using the term that Alzheimer's is type 2 diabetes of the brain, right? Metabolism issues. So your diet is really, really important. You need to have a healthy diet. If you have these things that we're talking about, these dysregulations that we're talking about, almost certainly you should be on low carb or keto type diet, maybe even a carnivore diet, because that is going to support the improvement of your metabolism system. And so obviously, I'm not a doctor and that kind of thing. If your doctor is knowledgeable about that stuff, talk to them. If they're not, find another doctor who is, and see, do you need to make good changes? There's so much information about that on how to have a good diet these days that it's pretty easy to get to. Obviously, exercise, but not all exercise is good for your health. There's actually sustained high cardio is actually destructive to your health. It may make you be able to run farther faster, but it's not going to make you live longer. And it actually is an indicator for lower lifespans. Strength training and low impact movement, walking especially, is things like Tai Chi or that kind of stuff, swimming, those kinds of things. Low impact and and not sustained high cardio. Very, very, very good. And obviously, strength training, very, very important. And again, kind of a low impact strength training. Again, you can go too far with that and start damaging your body. You don't need a lot. You need the right kind, and it needs to be consistent. Fellowship. This is huge. You need community. You need to not be lonely. You need to have deep, close friendships. God said in the very beginning, it is not good for man to be alone. And then he designed family, and he intended for us to live in these family groups, right? And be close to each other. I won't go into it, but there's a really, really interesting story. Um, I, it's either in, I think it's in one of Malcolm Gladwell's books about, it might be in one of the Freakonomics books, about a town in Pennsylvania in the 20th century, that in the middle of the 20th century, when there was this epidemic of heart attacks and cancer and all this stuff kind of, just exploding, this town didn't have anything. And I'm not going to go into the story, but they looked at all of this stuff, all these different factors to try and figure out, was it their diet? Was it the water? It was it what was it? Was it genetics? Everything that they looked at, there was nothing that could be pointed to as, oh, that's the factor. That's why they're not getting cancer. That's why they're living longer. That's why they're not getting heart disease. And in the end, what they figured out, it was they spent time together. They had very close friendships. It was a community of very, very close people that really supported each other, right? The thing that we're supposed to do as the body of Christ, right? And then finally is the Bible. And I'm linking this to, obviously, the Word of God is a big deal, and it changes us clearly. But in this particular case, I'm thinking of it in terms of one of the ways that um, psychology is showing that helps, and a lot of research is showing is that helps with all these problems we've talked about is mindfulness. And there's a lot of different ways of practicing mindfulness. And the way that I think as a Christian that we can practice that in a powerful way that has multi effects in addition to just the basic mindfulness is to do Bible meditation, where you read some scripture and you meditate on that scripture and you pray about it and you think about it and you just spend some time soaking in that word of God in a peaceful, quiet environment, and that again opens up that reward center of the brain. Okay, I've got one last thing that I want to cover before I close it out. And this is from a book called Heal Your Nervous System by Dr. Linnea Passler. She has something called an alertness elevator that I have found is really helpful. Basically, she uses this color system, and at the very low end, she actually has five. She has a purple, but I'm not going to go into that. Um, uh, in blue, that's like when you're having a good night's sleep, or you're just so relaxed. Maybe you're getting a massage, right? You're just in this peaceful, serene, safe, restful kind of state. And so everything's good, right? Your nervous system is just really, really good in that moment. Green is where you have an engagement. Maybe you're at work, but things are going well. You've got, your heart rhythm is normal. You're breathing normally. Excuse me. Your muscles are relaxed. You're able to focus. You are thinking in positive ways. You're maybe think about a meeting that you're having where in a team and you're solving problems and it's good and everybody feels good about what you're doing. Yellow is where you start to have challenges and pressure. So you know your pulse probably is increased. You've got some tension. um, you may be starting to feel some anxiousness and nervousness. um, you may begin to have some ruminating thoughts. That's a big deal. I'll have something to say about that here in a minute. And you're you're really being challenged. Red, I like to call it you lose it, right? It's just this is where you go into the fight flee modes, where even if you don't have those trauma responses, those are still natural responses, and you may feel and experience like I got to get out of here, right? Or you get into a heated argument with someone. So the idea is recognizing your current state. And if you find that you're in the red, bringing yourself down into yellow and then bringing yourself down into green. You're not likely in a situation like that to bring yourself into blue, but you don't have to. You just need to get back to green. That's why I call it. I call it getting back to green. And I've been practicing this for a while now. I've taught a number of people here in our Paducah church this this process of going back into green and how a number of them have read Passler's book, and it's very effective and very helpful. And this is kind of the process that I like to use. So the first thing is you recognize where am I in the moment. So you find you're in an argument, maybe with your spouse or a friend or a coworker or whatever. Maybe it's in you're driving down the road and somebody's cut you off, and you're feeling angry or you're feeling emotional or whatever. And so you recognize, okay, where am I? Am I in red? No, I don't think I'm in red, but I'm definitely not in green. I'm in yellow. Right? Okay. All right. So now I know where I am. If I need to take a break, take a break. If I'm in an argument with my wife and I recognize, oh my gosh, I'm in yellow and I'm headed to red, let's take a break. It's good, right? Let's just step away for a few minutes. That will allow me to go through the rest of this in a better manner. Because if I'm still in that fight, it's going to be harder to do these things. So it's good to kind of get yourself out of that situation. Box breathing is then what I like to do at that point. Box breathing is where you inhale through your nose for a count of 5 seconds basically. You hold it for 5. You then breathe out through your nose for a count of 5, and then you hold it for 5 before you breathe in again. And you do this for however long you need to. It could be 5, 10, even maybe 15 or 20 minutes, just however long you need to start to feel that coming back down. This is actually the technique Navy SEALs use when they're in a high tense, stressful situation to bring themselves back under control. If you need to, if you're ruminating in the process, what I have found is, you're in a bad situation, you're in yellow or red, right? Your mind is racing and you're like, I can't believe that she said that, or I can't believe he did that. And it's just, and you're thinking about what the next thing I'm going to tell him so and such and such. And you're going through that stuff, you're ruminating. If while you're box breathing, you will count out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What that will do is you cannot ruminate and count at the same time. Try it. It doesn't work, right? If you are counting, you are not ruminating. It's super effective. You may have to keep bringing yourself back to counting because you stop counting, you start ruminating again. But if you'll bring yourself back to counting, you'll find that the box breathing starts working. Pray for God to help and handle. So this is straight out of Philippians 4:6, right? Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, pray, right? And ask, right? Pray and ask God. And you can do this one obviously at any time. I recommended doing it through the entire process, right? And then express gratitude. This also comes from Philippians 4:6, where it's all these prayers with thankfulness, right? So I'm going to pray, Lord, help me with this. Help me get myself out of this state. Help me to see what's really happening here. And, I may even, who knows? I'm in a situation, there may be a demon involved in this situation. I'm going to need to know that from the Lord. And, and so I going through all of that, I'm doing the box breathing, I'm doing praying. I've gotten myself out of the situation so that I can work on this getting back to green. And then the last part of Philippians 4, I'm going to refocus my mind on good things. Whatever is true, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, all that kind of stuff, anything worthy of praise. And the way that I like to do that is, start with the things of God that are worthy of praise, right? And then I'm going to bring it back because if I've been doing the box breathing, everything's coming back down. And I've been praying, expressing gratitude, and all of that stuff starts bringing me back towards green. I'm probably in yellow at this point, probably not in red anymore. And I'm I'm then going to refocus my mind and I'm going to think on good things. Just like Paul says. Powerful stuff. As I get myself back into green, I'm feeling much more calm. I'm collected. I'm like, okay, I'm okay, right? I've still got this situation, but I have brought myself back into green. Now I want to ask, how can I bring selfless love back into that situation? And I'm going to pray, right? I'm going to ask, I'm going to think, and I'm going to pray that question. How can I bring selfless love back into this situation? And I believe you're going to know. One way or another, you're going to find out. Okay, so that's again, just a brief overview. Um, I can see I've already gone longer than I really intended to go. Um, but um, if you find anything, you got any questions or anything like that, please reach out. I'd love to answer. I'll put some book recommendations in the YouTube description notes, and I hope this was helpful to you. And I highly encourage you to take this further, learn more about all of these things, and um, if that's you that has these kinds of problems, or if it's you that uh, loves someone that has these kinds of problems, I am confident that it will help you to build more peace and to change a lot of those patterns over time until your brain is really working differently. Again, if you want to check us out on the web, it's a2kchurch.org, the number 2kchurch.org.